This is Mr. Mitchell with a video about an unlikely piece of literature, the Declaration of Independence. Now, when we study the Declaration of Independence, it is usually in a history class. And the Declaration of Independence, as you can see a picture of it here, written actually in ink on old paper because it was written in 1776. But this particular document is one of the most masterfully written governmental documents of all time. This actually can be studied for its literature, and this course is American literature. So this is the perfect time to take a look at the literary genius of the Declaration of Independence. Now, normally when somebody tells you this is good literature, you might want to go out and buy it and read it. Now, still, the Declaration of Independence is not as fun to read as most novels, as most anything else. But if you know the context behind why this was written, there's some really clever stuff here. Now, the Declaration of Independence had to be cleverly and masterfully written because it had two things it had to do. It had to legitimize the country's independence to other countries. Now, I say the country's independence, the colonies' independence to other countries. The colonies were way smaller in population and in power to Britain, its mother country. And if it was ever going to fight a war for independence, it would desperately need the help of other countries. So part of the plan of this document was to put the colonies on an equal playing field as other countries, that this was not just a few colonists who were mad with the government, that this is a legitimate possible country. Another thing it had to do is to help unite the colonies that weren't really united. At this time, you had the New England colonies, that's the ones that are farther north, that were probably more bought into this idea than the middle colonies, and maybe not so much the southern colonies, but the middle colonies, from what I've understood, they weren't necessarily really bought into this idea of independence from Britain. So this document had to legitimize it for other countries and for the colonies themselves. So this particular document is something that was written, and it had to be perfectly constructed to serve its purpose to give our country a chance to be a country. Now, there are 5 parts to the Declaration of Independence. On this video, we're only going to look at the introduction, but after the introduction, there is a preamble. There are indictments of King George, and there's a picture of King George, or a painting of King George. Then there's the denunciation of the British in a short part toward the end, and then there is the closing. Now, keep in mind, this is an argument as to why these colonies should be a country on its own. It's declaring themselves independent of Britain. How would you make an argument for that? Now, one of the best parts about this is that Thomas Jefferson, who wrote this, didn't start out with the British-American differences. It started out with why groups of people who are oppressed should be able to be independent. Let's take a look at what it says in the introduction. This is the first of the 5 parts. And the introduction is very short. You can see it's right here. In fact, it's only 1 sentence. But anyway, before this 1 sentence, you do have a subtitle here. The Declaration of Independence is the title, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. A couple of things stand out to me here. Here we have the word unanimous. From all I can tell, it wasn't really unanimous. But Thomas Jefferson put the word unanimous as the very first important word after the in this declaration. He said unanimous here. Why do you think it was important for this document to start with unanimous? And on your study guide, you'll end up answering that particular question. Next thing I notice up here is the word united. United is not going to be capitalized like States and America is. Now, when we write the United States of America, we capitalize U.S. and A. In fact, it's almost often called the USA. But in this particular document, I didn't make a capitalization mistake here. If you can look here, you can see it has States of America in bold and capitalized States of America. But United is not capitalized, and it's not even in bold. So this was a time before the USA even existed. And the name of the country probably was still up in the air. Jefferson called them the States of America and happened to have United here. Maybe this happened to help people call it the United States of America. But anyway, in a declaration explaining why the States of America should break away from Britain, the introduction doesn't mention either of these nations. Notice from when down to separation. You do not see States of America. You do not see Britain in there. Instead of starting with the issue, Jefferson started with why people should be able to be free, should be able to be their own country. Let's read. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to separation. I have put impel in blue. That will be a vocabulary word, just like indictments and denunciation were. So let's take a look at this. In the first sentence, the term or the phrase, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary, it makes it not a States versus Britain issue. Right off the bat, it makes the separation a human necessity issue. This is a necessity. This is necessary. It has to be done under certain circumstances. You can't have a king over all kinds of colonies in all circumstances. So he didn't start out with the problems of Britain and the conflicts with the Americas. He started out with, hey, you know, there are times when people have to dissolve, when groups have to separate, that there are times, and he's kind of laying the point that this is going to be one of those times. The conditions are right. Look at the statement, separate and equal. This is suggesting that the people in the colonies and the people in Britain may be separate, but they should have equal rights. Even though the colonies and Britain didn't look much like each other, the colonies had far less population and far less military power. By saying they're separate and equal suggests that their rights should have little to do with how big or how powerful they are. That even little colonies halfway across the world have the same rights as people who are backed by a strong military. And I think it was good that he ended up putting that. This introduction could have been used for any oppressed people, not just by people from the British colonies. And it elevated the conflict from differences of British citizens, which is what the United States people were at the time, to the rights of oppressed people everywhere. And did you notice that people are entitled by God to be dissolved if the situation is right? So he's really throwing in the morality of people being able to separate. Hasn't said a word yet about what the problems were, but just setting up the fact, hey, people can be separate from their king if the conditions are right. So if you notice, there doesn't seem to be any persuasion in this paragraph. If I were to ask you to write a paragraph persuading something, it probably wouldn't look like this. It so far just tells the reader that there's a time when separation is sometimes the right action, the entitled action by God, and that they will soon declare the causes that impel them into separation. And that's what will come in the later sections. Well, I hope you have some food for thought about this introduction. We'll talk a little bit about it, and then we'll watch something on the preamble.